I'm gonna talk in my pub talk about how we can better use public procurement to govern AI kind of in line with the public interest. And the first bit I'll be talking quite a bit, and then later we can also discuss, I don't know, talk about own experiences, but yeah, let's see, depends on how much who's there and yeah, so that's quite a flexible part. Okay, so I thought it makes sense to first maybe talk about AI in the public sector in general. Um, then why public procurement is kind of recently seen as this maybe very like effective lever to govern AI, so to demand more responsible AI. Then how it's happening right now. So how does private sector AI right now enter the public sector? What are difficulties right now? So why doesn't this citizen-centric or public interest-related procurement happen? Well, how can we do it better? And then what we're currently kind of doing. So me and Caitlin and other colleagues across Cambridge and Research Centre Trustworthy Data Science and Security, German research centre with a very long name. Yeah, and then a little bit of discussion or just Q&A or whatever. Yeah, it's meant to be very flexible depending on what interests you. Okay, so AI in the public sector, kind of similar to all other areas and industries. Also, the public sector has seen a massive push for AI, and often this is kind of related to the promises of increased efficiencies and cost saving. Really often these systems are purchased from the private sector, so the public sector doesn't build them themselves. And the process with which the public sector is kind of purchasing anything from the private sector is called public procurement. I'll talk a little bit more about the steps of this later, but for now, that's enough. However, this kind of adoption of AI in the public sector really hasn't been without quite massive harms and scandals. And I mean, here's some examples from like Australia with the whole Robodebt thing, the UK, but France, Netherlands, US, Georgia, but there's literally an example for most countries where it's sort of gone wrong. And I think one reason why this often happens is, well, the people for which AI usually doesn't work are the same people that are most reliant on public sector. So this just shows how difficult it is to build good AI for the public sector, and also how dangerous it can be. Because this is, yeah, it's not really the inaccuracies of AI, the populations for which it doesn't work. Yeah, are the people that are usually or often or over proportionally of worse health, more reliant on benefits, social housing, and so on. So public sector services. But this is obviously a massive problem, right? The public sector should follow the principles of good governance, so work in the citizens' interest, and also it's not a company, it's not a company that can lose trust and then do a rebrand and have a new name and it's fine. But if there's actually trust eroded in the public sector, this has like huge consequences, and this really shouldn't be risked at all. So in our research, and with us, I mean, yeah, colleagues across Cambridge, AI and Equality, and the German Research Centre with a very long name. So we're exploring how we can use public procurement to prevent these harms and have more responsible AI systems in public sector services. So why public procurement? Why do we think public procurement is useful here? Just really basic. The process of public procurement is there is the first step, which we call pre-procurement, isn't actually a formal step of the formal procurement process. But of course, before you formally procure something, you need to think about, well, we want something. What exactly do we want? And so on. So yeah, that's pre-procurement. And then is the tendering and evaluation process. So where basically the public sector authority makes a list of the requirements of what exactly they want to buy. Then they also say how exactly they're going to evaluate certain offers they get. So from suppliers that say, okay, we want to provide this product or service. and then these different supplier bids get then compared based on exactly how it was predefined, and then the contract is awarded to the supplier that gets the highest score. Then the contract's awarded, then there's the phase for which the contract was defined, so a certain product or service is delivered, and then the contract ends. And across this sits kind of like procurement. We call it procurement infrastructure for the loss of a better word, but it's basically just saying, well, there is like policy in which this happens, depending on who decides what, who is involved when, procedures, culture, generally appetite for AI, and so on. Just like things that influence all these different layers. Yeah, and in recent literature, in the kind of responsible AI space, the idea emerged that couldn't the public sector put responsible AI criteria in these tenders or RFPs, like requests for proposals, which is the US term for a tender, more or less the same thing. And then basically say, okay, we're only interested in buying systems when they fulfill this certain list of responsible AI criteria. So kind of be a gatekeeper and say systems that don't fulfill this, we're not ever going to use in public sector services. This is promising because governments have a lot of money. So these contracts are huge. And this just means that technology providers are really keen to comply with these practices. And because they obviously, I guess, changing practices just for one specific product they want to offer to the public sector is quite a lot of work. So they might just change their general practice overall. And also this kind of really explicit demand from the public sector might be able to shift markets as well. So this can have actual consequences beyond just the specific systems that are procured. In short, public procurement is currently seen as really a strategic lever for governments to shape public sector AI on the market. So instead of being quite passive consumers, to go more actively shape systems and markets for the public interest. And the research that we're doing, and I'll be presenting a lot of this today, is to really put this potential of public procurement into practice. Because there's a lot of research that says this should have potential, but there isn't a lot of research that says how to actually do this in practice towards this goal. If there are any questions or thoughts, just at any time, just scream, because I can't see you, but I trust you that you're there. Okay, so this promised potential, which sounds amazing, led us to two questions. Does this already happen? Like, how well do we already use public procurement to shape AI? And if not, how can we do this? So to do this, we did a practitioner and expert study with 17 professionals working in or public sector technology procurement. Actually, in the end, everyone had some experience with AI as well. And these people were public sector buyers, technology vendors, advisors to either of the two, or experts and researchers, people forming policy at the moment. And it was really, really embedded people. So these were people that have been doing or thinking about this for a long time. And we focus on the UK and the EU just because the procurement there is structurally very similar, and also with the EU AI Act and so on, they have quite like similar goals at the moment, where in the US procurements like work quite differently. So yeah, that's why we focused on this. And a lot of the research I'll be talking now in the next sort of 20 minutes, maybe 30, is from this paper that I presented last week in Barcelona at the CHI conference, so the world's biggest HCI conference. And we won an award for it, so that's nice. Yeah. So I'll also later provide links and everything. We actually made a website to make the findings of this paper more accessible to the public sector, right? If you give, sometimes, I don't know, if I work with a lot of local authorities, and then if you give them a research paper, it's kind of a bit more scary. So we made a website that has kind of the key findings, a bit more digestible. So based on these interviews, and yeah, what I'm talking about in the next 20 minutes is all based on these interviews. Do we currently use the potential of public procurement? So we found kind of 3 key ways how private sector AI currently enters the public sector. The first one are ad hoc procurements. So most formal AI procurements we saw is that they're embedded in standard IT procurement processes. So there are no AI specific kind of requirements. So it doesn't even have something like non-biased training data or something like this. Doesn't, or any fairness metric or anything. It doesn't really occur. But then there are first AI specific tenders emerging, which usually was really like ad hoc. So it was more like, oh, we want this AI now, so let's kind of firefighter approach, sort of write a tender for this. But it wasn't a strategic planned effort. The second, still like a kind of formal procurement process, was AI procurement under framework contracts. And framework contracts are huge contracts that governments have with usually large suppliers like Microsoft. And then basically buying another product from Microsoft is much, much easier than from a different vendor. So because they're kind of like trusted vendors, and then there is much less scrutiny, so it's a lot faster, but then there's also less scrutiny, which is obviously can be dangerous. Really interesting was the third route. So we found that there are quite a lot of additional channels that aren't any form of formal procurements and have less oversight. And there was one that existing systems that public authorities use since a long time suddenly have an update that has AI. And sometimes people don't even know about this. Like there was in the UK, they used a system in immigration since a long time. And then suddenly they were in the news for like, oh my God, they use an algorithm and AI stuff in immigration. And the people working with the system didn't know. So they had this scandal without being informed that this is actually what they're doing, which is quite wild. Then the second kind of additional challenge was that public bodies are often kind of sometimes, so not that many people mentioned this, but it came up twice, that sometimes they find AI in sort of IoT devices, like a traffic light or something, that suddenly has some sensors, analyzes some stuff and sends it abroad. So kind of keyword spyware. And then the third one, which came up a lot, and also since this data collection came up in also different countries and so on, that basically there are AI pilot projects and then they just are kept running without ever going through the formal procurement process that has a lot more tests and comparisons and so on. And while pilot projects are great and actually we advocate for them, if something runs for like 5 years, is this still a pilot? Yeah. So, long story short, the private sector AI does enter the public sector largely without strategic checks at the moment. And I'm sorry that some of my images aren't loading. I was doing some of this on very poor Wi-Fi, and apparently they didn't make it. But I think all the content is there. Okay. Again, shout out if anything is unclear or you have like some anecdotes or I don't know, anything, want to share something. Okay, so we've just seen it's not looking that great. Why is it not looking that great? And so we found kind of 4 key challenges that currently prevent this, and I'll go through them. So the first one is a lack of clear guidance. So a lot of people we talked to said, so yeah, one of the quotes is, there's still a lot of soul searching going on about how to deal with AI. And this includes even defining AI. So often people weren't even sure what is AI and what isn't. Then there was also not really a vision to say, this is what we want to do with AI here in the public sector. Like this is for what we want to use it and this is for what we don't want to use it. That was missing. And then of course, because this is missing, then it's also really hard to know, okay, and how do I translate this vision into kind of specific procurement guidance. So even if there's a vision that says like, oh, we want to use it in a fair way, then it's like, okay, how do I put this in a procurement contract? Because that's obviously really hard. Limited capacity. So we really found that procurement teams are often, they were posted on Monday, AI on Tuesday. So quite often, especially in the so there are a few really advanced areas or cities and so on that do have AI-specific procurement teams. But in general, a procurement team, they're really trained in the quite rigid procurement process, and then they apply it to all sorts of stuff. So they don't have AI-specific training. And often they're really overworked, so they also don't have the time to go out and read about AI, because they're often extremely time constrained. So but this means obviously if they lack some technical skills, then they can't really scrutinize vendor claims. And this is really related to the next one, and that this is strong vendor influence. This was actually shocking. So how much we found that large vendors, so big tech companies, so all the ones you're thinking of now, that they really influence what the public sector is aware of and what they think is beneficial to them. So what they're gonna buy, because they have all these like polished sales pitches and existing relationships and so on. And related to the last challenge, people in the public sector often have this, and this is an actual quote, like inferiority complex, that they don't feel like they can really, they feel like, oh, this AI thing, like I don't really understand it, so I'll just do what these experts tell me. This doesn't mean that so that was something that our interview said, that this was like maybe 5 years ago, if, I don't know, Google or Microsoft would have come and said, this is what you need, they would have said, yes, please, here's everything. And this apparently has changed quite a bit. So there is now definitely this knowledge that tech companies aren't necessarily the good ones, but then because they don't know what else to do, they just kind of go with it. And this last challenge, this is something that maybe people don't think about this much, but this is that AI systems are often kind of layered on top of legacy systems. Like, I don't know, if you have Microsoft Office, there's now Copilot, which interacts with different Microsoft products. So this makes it really hard to work with different suppliers and providers. Also, you need to manage their relationships. And then also to switch is really hard. Like, once you have a chain of interdependent systems, then removing one thing out of this chain can be a really huge problem, including things around IP, right? If a company trains a model on citizen data, like whose IP is this afterwards? Because it's obviously citizen data this was trained on, but companies often sell on these models to other cities. So this is a problem. There is a quote on how hard it can be to actually switch systems. Okay, so going forward, what can we do to overcome these challenges to do this better? And so we came up with 6 promising practices, and I walked through all of them. Super happy, like we came up with these practices. We since ran a few workshops where we discussed these practices. We currently have a survey where we have these practices, try to evaluate them. But if any of you has an opinion on them or experience why this actually might be really hard in practice, while some of them are actually not a good idea, or contexts in which they might not work and others where they might work better, please share. Let me quickly think. Oh yeah, so some here. For each of these, I'll quickly explain again why we came up with it. So it's a little bit repetitive with the challenges, but I think it really helps to set up why we came up with these. So the first one, provide clarity and vision, guidance, and operationalization. And I think this is pretty clear from the challenges, right? Lack of a clear, consistent vision, defining AI is unclear, and then these very different appetites for risk and innovation. Then massive gaps in AI procurement. There's literally no one right now who knows how to do AI procurement. There are some opinions and experiments and so on emerging, but so far it's incredibly intransparent. Yeah, and even existing regulatory frameworks like the EU AI Act, it's completely unclear how to put this in a procurement contract. Beyond basically asking, do you comply? Yeah. And there were massive concerns about this. So generally, people were really concerned about negative effects and harms and so on for citizens, but they didn't really know how to put this in the contract, and they were also not sure how even general procurement law would then apply to AI. So what we propose is to have the central and action provision to define AI and also the desired use of AI, so kind of the vision of it. Then to say, okay, how you have this vision, how do you get there? So really to operationalize it, how to use this during AI procurement. And why this was why the experts we talked with said that this is really important, because to have some strategic alignment, because right now different councils might do and municipalities and cities might do really different things, so it's completely incoherent. So to have these, and of course, if you want to incentivize best practice change, then being incoherent isn't massively effective. And interestingly, this was seen as a complement, this like central direction as a complement and not a replacement for more decentralized adaptation, because municipalities and councils know their own context best. So it's really useful to give guidance, but it shouldn't be necessarily a requirement and should allow for local flexibility. In short, we need clear guidance on what AI means and how it should be used to align actors on its purpose, policy, and goals and risks, while directly linking principles, measures, and objective to procurement practices. Yeah, so as I said, if you have any examples maybe where this was done, or thoughts on this practice overall, or maybe what could be really hard about this. I mean, I think this one is a really hard one. It basically says, figure out how to ideally do it and then write guidance about this. So for this one, maybe the challenges are pretty obvious why this is extremely hard. But yeah, if you have any thoughts, feel free to share. I think the next ones are a little bit more specific. But this one shows how, yeah, please.
No, I was just going to say, for me, it makes me think the whole process that you're explaining of how now it's not spoken so much about, but when there was the hype around gender responsive budgeting, for example,
Yeah.
and gender responsive procurement processes, I see some parallels there around the lack of vision. Like if there is no real understanding of why that is important to do a gender responsive procurement, then yeah, the procurement officers will not know what are they exactly looking for. I mean, is it just companies that have women as CEOs? Is it companies that are owned by women? What does it mean to be owned by women, or whatever it was that the criteria that was put there? So
Yeah.
For me, it I can really relate to that and think, like, wow, this is a priority for people to really understand why that is important. And I wonder if there is a way to do that in a way that is not static, because like just linking with the comment you made that there are different processes and different like power structures, the municipality, the national government, the whatever. If there are ways to like discuss those wider parameters that should be wide enough for people to feel flexible,
Yeah.
to move in between. And my question is, how is that done in a way that still allows us to shift power? Because I feel like the big vendors, the big tech companies are so embedded already in the way
Yeah.
that governments engage with AI that I really don't know how their view of what AI is and needed for. Like there's already so much lobby into
Yeah.
it. And I wonder if you came across, sorry that it's just many
No,
thoughts
please.
now.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
wonder if
yeah.
you came across any suggestions on how to make those procurement processes more open. Because even, I mean, it's more time and cost effect and costly.
Yeah,
But I'm thinking if it's a new issue and we're talking about how much this affects all of us and how much
yeah,
it affects our democracies, shouldn't we think of ways to bring in like those decisions when you're like, do we really need this? Shouldn't at least that be more open to a wider stakeholder
yeah,
that could weigh in and maybe help the government think about that? They don't have to have all the answers because nobody has them.
yeah, yeah,
What
yeah.
if it's a scenario where we actually need to rethink our governance practices in a way? I don't know if you came across those any examples of people exploring, testing things like
Yeah.
that.
Um, so I think a few will come up during the next practices for sure. Also, I am currently working on a paper where I say we talk so much about participatory AI development, but a lot of systems aren't developed by the people that use them later or that are the most impacted. So who should be involved in buying AI and when? And so on, just to say that we need much more attention on this. Um, we worked with did like a workshop with municipalities in the Netherlands who are like pretty advanced because they had so many scandals. They're now really trying to do better. But they said that they do a lot of citizen engagement, but that this is extremely ineffective, and they don't in actually involving different publics, because they said it's always the same people that have one topic that they really care about, but then they come to every consultation about this one topic, even if it has nothing to do with the discussion. And they feel like, especially the people that they want to involve, like minority voices, they don't have the time and capacity or even awareness of things like this happening. So it's a really open question, and I'm later talking about some ideas of what could be helpful. So yeah, maybe I stop here, but I 100% agree. I also love that you draw these parallels to your own experience outside of AI, because I think this is a massive one. And yeah, maybe I'll leave it there and then I'll later have some more thoughts on this. Okay, practice 2, and I think this is definitely one to say, okay, how can we have guidance, or like guidance that allows for local flexibility and so on, and sharing best practices, because it is currently so intransparent who does what. So really fragmented and ad hoc procurements, what I already said. So there is a massive risk of just duplicated effort. There's no exchange of insights and expertise, that the wheel is constantly reinvented, and also reuse of systems, right? Public sector, often they have the same need, right? Like every municipality needs to deal with waste and just stuff like this, where like waste management, where they really could reuse systems, or at least say, this is why we chose this system. This is why it worked well here. This is, I think, who we would recommend this to, and so on. So just really, really adopting stuff more, and also just reviewing systems so that other people can learn from, okay, how did you procure this? How did this go? What do you wish you would have put in the tender that you now miss? And so on. So we just really need to bundle positive and negative learnings so people don't need to make the same mistakes all the time. This is also so obvious, but it's not really happening. Then yeah, also platforms maybe to pool expertise and demand. So to say, I don't know, if you're working on waste management, we had this expert team that just did this. Maybe ask them for advice on what you're doing. And interestingly, also, especially smaller municipalities and councils felt like they don't really have the bargaining power to force tech companies to kind of custom build stuff for their needs. But then if they would So to make whole groups of different municipalities, and they would, as a collective, kind of procure, then they would have more bargaining power. So yeah, just so we learn from each other, and both regarding specific systems, but also regarding vendors. So if someone is a nightmare to work with, and we've heard stories like one municipality had to buy back data. Basically, they wanted the company to do a fairness audit after a year of working with them, and then the company said, "No, that's not in the contract, but you can buy the data back and do it yourself," even though it's like their citizen data. So yeah, really crazy stuff. But if stuff like this would be known, then obviously no one would work with this vendor. Yeah, and we need this local to local and national, or transnational even, but also between the public sector and research institutions would be great. And actually even within the same organization, because it doesn't mean that, I don't know, everyone in the city of Amsterdam who does AI procurement actually speaks with each other, because they might do this for, I don't know, traffic and waste management and, I don't know, different departments, and then actually not share insights even within one city. So key takeaway 2 is that we need to share knowledge and positive as well as negative experiences to support public sector buyers to just learn from what's already there. Again, yeah, seems quite obvious, but didn't really massive problem. Like everyone we interviewed said that this is a problem. Because you don't even know who already procured something. There's no overview of who's doing what. Again, if there's any examples, thoughts, challenges, just scream. Otherwise, we go to 3, which is, prepare people and culture towards careful AI procurement, is how we called it. So not tell people you really need to do AI, but to be like, okay, this is what AI can do and this is what it cannot do. But yeah, we found that there's this lack of AI literacy, which really was a problem, because then people can't really evaluate what they're offered. So they cannot know if what they're being sold is fluff, if it's the right pricing, and so which I think makes a lot of sense and is very interesting. Then this inferiority complex I already talked about, and really interesting here, which is then related to something I'll talk about later, but because they were so scared that they didn't really know that much about AI, they would write extremely specific tenders, and they would then focus on really rigid compliance with the tender, instead of really saying which AI is solving our problem the most effective, or which system, it doesn't even need to be AI, also opening up to other solutions. But I'll talk about this more in a second. Yeah, again, I said this earlier. So obviously upskilling procurement related teams, and especially the people that receive supplier marketing, because they're really targeted, especially by large companies that have like a lot of resources to do shiny marketing stuff. And then if the people that receive this marketing are first line of defense, I think that would be extremely useful. Again, interdisciplinary teams, so that the people that receive the marketing stuff, that there is someone with more technical training, someone with more social science training, a social justice expert would be really interesting. Yeah, exactly, to engage responsibly with AI and critically assess what they're offered. So then we have several levels of defense here. Yeah, and then again, what I said, that because procurement teams really it's a very rigid process normally, procurement, right? For tables or something, you basically compare based on price. You say maybe what size of table you want, and then for schools or something, and then you get offers from different vendors, and usually people go by price, maybe a bit of quality, but it's really rigid. And then now, for AI, it's really hard to assess maybe something like, how well does this solve my problem? what are potential risks of discrimination. So because this is so hard to say, then they just concentrate on stuff that's easier to specify, but these things don't always make sense. So yeah, strengthening AI literacy enables buyers to scrutinize vendor claims, reducing over-reliance on limited procurement capacity. Building such expertise across procurement teams and related stakeholders is essential. So we talked about these three now, and these three, like if we look at this from earlier, these are really like kind of cross-cutting procurement infrastructure, right? Like if we look at them again, they're across individual procurements, right? So AI literacy that's helpful across different AI procurements, knowledge sharing, guidance. And then the next three we're talking about, they're going to be much more specific to procuring one specific system. So they're a bit more concrete. Again, shout out. So this is what I've already alluded to a little bit, but really important is to focus on defining the outcome or the problem and not prescribe the solution. So what I mean by this is basically to not say, we want 5 cars and they need to have 5 seats and they need to drive at least this fast. Instead saying, we want mobility, and then let the market innovate what they come back with. And this is like a massive problem. Like I have, outside of this project, I have given kind of expert input on a tender written by, you would probably assume this is one of the cities in the entire world that's the most technologically advanced. And they have written a tender document, and I told them, you need a problem statement. Like, why do you want the system? And then the problem statement was, we have an increased need for AI capability. That is not a problem statement, because it doesn't tell me what problem you have. So just as an example that this really can be a problem. So they just say, basically their problem is, we want AI. This is yeah, shocking. And as I said, that if you really describe exactly which cars you want, you really limit innovation in the market. And this is really problematic because the public sector isn't an expert in technology, and they don't need to be. They're an expert in their problem. So they need to be very specifically and good and knowledgeable in the problem they're trying to solve, or the outcome they want to achieve. And they should obviously define this in collaboration, not just like one person saying this is what our problem is. Yeah. So this is again what I said, that there's this fear that if it's not there, it's not going to be taken care of, because they feel this inferiority complex towards big tech companies that they mistrust now, and they feel like, oh my God, they're going to take advantage of me not knowing this. So I just put every little detail in the tender, but then the outcome is really a problem. And then also, super related to what I already said, is that because of these shiny sales pitches, basically through these sales pitches, the public sector becomes aware of available systems, and then they just describe the system that they were introduced to in the tender. And then obviously this massively influences who's going to get the contract. Because if it's written based on an example that they know about, but they don't know the market outside of this, then yeah, this is obviously extremely biased. Yeah, shiny sales pitches and so on. And also, we really found that big tech is always there when the public sector has strategic discussions about what they want to get. And this obviously really influences what is bought. Yeah. This is also interesting. So, because if these tenders are really long and specific, then it is a lot of work to show that you comply with them. Like, for example, sometimes you need to create a UX report, validate against certain benchmarking data sets that sometimes are provided by the public sector or so on. it basically it can take weeks for a company just to show that they have a system that would comply with a tender. And if you're a local startup, you don't have that capacity or even knowledge on how to really do this, which then again massively advantages big tech and large companies that have this capacity and knowledge on how to do this process. Yeah, and then also big tech has framework contracts, so they often don't even need to go through the really scrutinized procurement route. And interestingly, this came up several times that people said that SMEs actually, like local companies, actually deliver much better solutions and are much cheaper because they so they know the context, right? And as we all know, context is key, but they're also willing to, for them, the public sector is probably quite a large customer, and then they're really willing to tailor things to their needs. Whether for Microsoft doesn't care whether like some city in Europe has specific needs, and then they're like, yeah, this is that we have like limited motivation to have local specialization of their system. Yeah. But obviously there's also the problem with startups and stuff. They're less reliable, often have less stable supply chains, might run out of funding, even though when they have a public sector contract that massively helps their stability. But I don't know, you probably don't want to run your whole healthcare system on tiny startups because that's too risky. So it's really a difficult balance between encouraging local innovation, but also making sure things are reliable. And also what means local innovation these days, where supply chains of AI are so complex with like LLM wrappers and so on. It's extremely complex. So we hope that if people focus more on defining the outcome and the problem, then they don't focus on hyped and well-pitched AI solution, but instead on their need. Stakeholder dialogues, please, please, like in everything, like in every, I feel like this is almost like product design, before you build or buy a product, please know why you want that, like what's the need for it. Yeah. And then really importantly, also inviting SMEs to come to these pre-procured market dialogues, because in theory, they should be open to all companies in this space, but it's expensive to attend. And if you have like 3 employees, you can't have one of them always go to these dialogues. So I think there needs to be something like mini scholarships for SMEs to attend, at least like travel paid and so on. It's really a problem because they get just excluded from the very start. And then also we've spoken to some people that work on more iterative procurement processes, which is obviously really hard because procurement has contracts and iteration means flexibility, but no one is going to sign a contract where they don't really know what they need to deliver. So there's kind of the rigidity of normal procurement and contracts doesn't really fit to iterative system design that we need to make sure that systems do and keep addressing needs and concerns of affected groups. So yeah, that's also a huge one because I'll talk about this when we get there. Yeah, but all this, what I just talked about, just means there is no fair market competition right now. And that's illegal, really. Because, if only big tech has the access to pre-procurement dialogues, strategic discussions, if they're the people that influence what the public sector is aware of, and their preference massively, they're the only ones that have the capacity to apply to tenders because it's so complicated. Then this really limits competition, and limited competition means also less innovation. So I hope, that's something that maybe I can get decision makers if I say less innovation. If you don't regulate this, that's maybe a good thing. Let's see. Okay, so takeaway 4 is approach that focuses more on the problem and outcome can reduce the influence of large providers in this very kind of early agenda setting stage, and avoid these really prescriptive tenders that might exclude potentially stronger solutions that maybe that aren't exactly the same that was pitched by the big tech company, but actually might address the problem much better and in a more locally aware way. Indeed, when public buyers take a leading role in defining their needs, it can direct purchasing power towards what is required rather than what is marketed. This really massively summarizes what we need to do. Second to last, I'm sorry, I'm aware I'm talking quite a long time. If you get tired, let me know.
Emma, can I just ask you a question?
Yeah, please.
I might have to drop off soon. In
Yeah.
relation to the big tech dominance, do you see or think there might be any changes? Because now I think it's also this narrative around, particularly EU governments being more aware of kind of like how captive they've been to
Yeah.
like big tech data economy system kind of. Do you think there might be any changes? Are you hearing anything like might that be motivating kind of a way to reduce that dominance?
Yeah, so there's massive discussions around digital sovereignty, right? Like there is definitely a push for this on a theoretical level, also in like policy forums and stuff. And I mean, yeah, like Europe is investing a lot to have more local solutions. But then I think this sometimes underestimates the complexity of stuff right now because I mean a lot of technology now are just like LLM wrappers built on stuff from large big tech companies abroad. Um, and then also even if we build data centers in Europe, like where are the chips coming from? They're from American companies. So it's not like I almost feel in some of these areas the ship is sailed. But I also do think, I mean, this is getting really meta now, but I do think that other countries should really think about, okay, what is actually a good vision of how what do we want from AI? Like, what future do we want with AI? Because, I mean, so far the results on how much more effective it makes people and work is extremely mixed. There is not really evidence that companies adopting loads of AI are much better, especially these large models. Like local AI, surely it can do great stuff. But and then I don't know if we use the US as a model, like should Europe really hard try to do what the US is doing, or should they say actually it doesn't look like it's that good for the US? Like the economy isn't massively profiting from this, and also whatever the money is now invested in Europe in even local AI will basically flow to the US because it will buy chips, startups will pay LLM companies to use their APIs and so on. So it's not necessarily that easy. God, this is really rambly. I'm sorry. But there was a really amazing talk 2 days ago, and I need to look back at my notes, but it was a researcher that's much more coming from a policy focus and basically works for a foundation that at the moment get funding to do the research that actually can move toward a better future. But her opinion, which is a little bit what I was reflecting to now, but I need to read much more about it before I'm really clear on it. But her opinion was that Europe really needs to stop to try to do the exact same thing that the US is doing because it's not actually working for the US. And innovation at what price and so on. And so far innovation, yeah, anyway. Yeah, but I mean, building local companies and focusing on local solutions, that is definitely a trend I'm seeing. This is definitely a trend that is extremely useful. Whether we should try to build our own big unicorns, I don't know. Maybe. I've heard that the Lidl behind Lidl, the supermarket, the company is building. They are really trying to build. They build their own data centers now, and so on, because they want to develop and own, I don't know, LLM, some huge AI system. I'm not sure what exactly. It must be an LLM. So they're really trying to make it from the ground up European. I keep you posted. Sorry, this was not a very concise answer. Yes, there is a massive push for Europe-based stuff. Definitely happening. There's Eurostack, this like 100 billion investment for the next 10 years. Was it 30 billion? Anyway, like a huge number. Maybe it's 300. I need to look that up, but it's called Eurostack. You can Google it. It's a massive investment from the European Union in own AI infrastructure, and so on. So there is a lot happening. I think this is very promising in kind of emancipate from big tech companies. Sorry, I feel like I've been to so many conferences, I'm in full on a rambly mode. I'll try to be a bit more concise now. Second to last one. So as I already said, AI depends on complex IT infrastructure. So there's this integration, data sharing between models, common registration models. So it's really like complex. And if someone works with Microsoft Azure or Copilot, then they have different APIs and so on. So it's all quite a complex puzzle piece. And yeah, data sets don't have the right quality, and the IP stuff that I talked about earlier is considered too late. And then all this stuff really just means there's massive vendor lock-ins. So where people now have one provider and they can't really move on or even change one of the puzzle pieces because it's just all too connected. So yeah, we should stop to see AI as isolated applications, that it's more like a property of a complex technological system in broader IT infrastructure and data supply chains. So there should be more reuse of existing also open source systems, and there is a massive push for open source in the EU, which is great. System repositories where councils can just see what exists, how is it going, can I maybe reuse some bits or start with this open source code and then have some developers adapt to my needs and so on. And just knowing about which technology they're using and their interdependencies is really, really needed, because that's also not happening that well at the moment. Yeah, and thinking about IP that it develops from a project from the outset, because this is also money, right? So in a way, yeah, IP that can make a lot of money based on citizen data should be made sure that this profits citizens as well. Yeah, so integrating procured systems with legacy systems really requires early attention, and not an afterthought. And right now it's an afterthought or no thought, which is also an issue. Yeah, so AI is part of wider systems. There are dependencies. So yeah, people just really need to plan and contract for these things. Last one. This is really interesting. So I talked about the procurement process earlier, that there is, at some point the contract is awarded and then this period afterwards. But this really means that at the moment there is often, after the contract is awarded, there's no quality control, or there is control that checks whether the company adheres to certain contractual requirements, but there isn't anything like, are people using it? Are people still happy with it? What are fairness metrics, like audits and stuff of the system, is often really not happening. And that's obviously a massive problem, because as we all know, AI systems interact so much with their context. Some of them learn, context might change. So what worked a year ago might really not work now. So this is super essential. Yeah, that's what I said. Oh yeah, and at the moment, responsible AI criteria are sort of a nice to have often if they are in tenders, then they are a nice to have. So they have no actually strong or any impact on the decision which system is bought. And obviously, as long as they're nice to have, that's, well, might as well not include them then. Yeah, so this needs to be both in how bids are evaluated, but then also carried through into contracts and monitoring. Yeah, so we just need these quality responsible AI criteria, quality assessment criteria, also after the contract is awarded. And here it might be very useful to have staggered contracting, so to withhold some money and pay more on a regular period, because otherwise companies might just not be motivated to change their system because they've already been paid for this period and now they just want it to be over. And this massively happened a lot, that basically risks were identified and then the company said, well, that's not part of the contract. I don't care. Yes. Oh yeah, and please be on technical focus. Please speak to the people that are affected by it. Yeah. This is what I said. Yes. Yeah, exactly. If this isn't in the contract, there is no leverage afterwards to make the company change. So that's really important. Okay. That's it. Sorry, this was very long. I somehow I thought I have more time. I feel like I've went on a lot of tangents. This you can scan this QR code. There's the website where this is all in a much more digestible format and maybe also easier to show other people that you think should know about this. There's also, yeah, the paper if you want to read up. There's even more detail, if you can believe. Okay, quickly, some ongoing research and advocacy that we've been doing in this space. So these are the workshops that I already talked about with VNG. This is kind of the municipality union in the Netherlands. And we're also planning some with the local government association in the UK. We have this survey up that is for different topics, also including open source procurement, which keeps coming up, and I think is extremely interesting because this can really help with building own systems and sharing them across councils and system reuse and removing duplicated efforts and so on. If you know anyone working in the public sector along technology procurement or use or any of this, please, we massively have issues finding people that are willing to fill this out. I think for most people, this will only be 5 minutes. If they're very experienced, it might be much longer. Just as a disclaimer, you know, if they use open source or contribute to open source in the public sector, then there's a lot of extra questions, but most people don't. But I would be, if you know anyone, please, location doesn't matter, size of whether it's for the country procurement or city procurement doesn't matter. Okay, and then, yeah, this is just, I don't know. So we also try, and this is more with, like, this is with AI inequality, this isn't with my academic affiliations. We really try to push this stuff at different places, like here at UNESCO, here at the United Nations Forum on Business and Human Rights. This is me last week with Caitlin at the Council of Europe, where we now with AI inequality have official observer status. So that's pretty major. This means I can help write the procurement guidance for AI now, which I'm going to do in June. So hopefully all this research will actually have impact. And if there is anything that you think I should be researching more, please let me know, because I don't have any experience working with the public sector. Tiny bit. I worked for a healthcare startup in the UK. Healthcare is completely public sector. Anyway, so I have some tiny experience, but there is so much different. I feel like I like some practical experience, practical insights into how this works in practice. So if there is anything that you think I should be looking at more, and then carry forward in these documents, let me know. Key takeaways. I will not go into that much detail in them, but we need AI-specific procurement stuff that takes context and so on into account. Procurement seems to be really promising. Right now, we're not using it. There's massive potential to use it. There's massive potential to shape best practices, to even shape how, wait, this is kind of this slide, but I think this is really important, that right now the public sector really is a passive consumer. They are told by tech companies what they should buy. This is an issue. And I really hope that this research and other people's research can really help to show the public sector how to be active in there and to say, this is the technology that we want in our services, and this is the technology we don't want in our services, because they're the customer. They can choose, and they have the power, even though they don't really realize at the moment. Which, yeah, is related to the second point, that there are these massive power asymmetries at the moment, and that we need to empower public sector buyers, which seems ridiculous because they have the money. It's rare that someone who wants to buy something feels like they don't have the power to shape what they buy, because they have. But it's really complex, and I also understand that there is, fear to stifle innovation seems to be everywhere, even though I'm not sure which innovation we're stifling with all this. But anyway, that's another topic to discuss. So yeah, I really hope that this helps to put the potential of procurement more into practice. Thank you.